Um, Good morning, everybody. This is Sharmila back again with a session on designing a homeschooling curriculum. In the past three sessions, we have looked at various aspects of designing a curriculum. Right, the first session I gave a brief overview of everything that is part of the a curriculum, and it is not just the syllabus or the textbooks or the content that is part of the curriculum, but it is about how we deliver that curriculum, how we implement what we want our children to learn. In the following session, we looked at my notion of childhood. What do I understand by who is a child and what is childhood? Was the second session that I did. In the last session, we looked at parenting styles and how our parenting styles have an impact on what our children learn and how our children learn and how we facilitate learning for our children. Today's session, we are going to look at learning styles and what is learning styles. Actually, even without labeling it as learning styles, what we're going to look at briefly is how children learn. We are going to delve a little deeper into how children learn. I'm going to present a few theories about how children learn. Now, what I want to say before I begin talking about these theories on how children learn is that never regard these theories as universal truths. These theories are usually an interpretation of a person, an educationist or a psychologist or somebody who's delved deeper into child learning and development, and this is their take on how children learn. And it's not necessary that it applies completely to you. Some elements might apply, some things you might see as working differently for you. And being aware of that is very crucial. And since we are into the homeschooling journey, this becomes an essential thing to keep in mind that these theories that I talk about are not universal truth. Nevertheless, they help us gain a lot from understanding what these theories are talking and what they are trying to say about learning. I'm going to start sharing a small screen with y'all. Let me do it as a slideshow. So, so when we ask the question of how children learn, what are the thoughts that come to everyone's mind? As homeschoolers, we are concerned about our own children, and we strongly believe that every child learns differently and every child is unique. So have we ever delved into how does my child learn? How is my child understanding things? How is my child making sense of the world around me? How do they know what to do when? How are they acquiring different skills? Do we really ask these questions to ourselves as parents? Do we go into that mode of inquiry and observation, and rejoice in the in the revelations that come through our inquiry and observations around our children? So, very often when I look at my own children, I have seen that my children many a times learn when they observe others doing something. They also have their own thought processes and feelings around what they are observing. So there is a lot of thinking and feeling that goes on. There are times when we talk to someone or to ourselves too, to sort out and to make meaning about things. And many a times we want to try to do something ourselves, just if we want to see something happening or we want to learn about something, we want to see it ourselves. We want to do it ourselves. We are active beings. We are not passive beings who will just sit and watch someone else do something for us. Plus, there are many a times where you use repetition and practice. So you want to do things over and over and over again, and that repetition also becomes a mode of practice. Now, to give you an example here, my oldest son was fascinated by Spider-Man. He wanted to know all about spiders, and he wanted to draw spiders, and he wanted to uh, draw Spider-Man. He wanted to see all Spider-Man movies again and again and again. And he was trying to make sense of things around the whole concept of Spider-Man around Spider-Man, and he also wanted to think and make meaning for himself in terms of whether Spider-Man is real or whether it is a fiction or a figment of imagination. So now, how did he do all this? So he was just about 5 years then, and how did he do all this? One, he he loved watching Spider-Man movies again and again and again. And every time he said he would laugh at something different, or he would want me to rerun a different scene. There were a lot of thoughts and feelings and around what he was watching, and there were a lot of questions around what is responsibility, and why does Spider-Man do this, or why does Spider-Man do that. Then there was also a lot of there were a lot of drawings. So he would repeatedly draw Spider-Man faces, and in fact, he would ask me to draw it for him, and he would observe me drawing it, and then he would draw it himself. So there was a lot of repetition and practice too. So every thing that a child is curious about or interested in, and they use these multiple ways to learn something. So similarly, when my daughter was learning the hula hoop, she initially spent so much time observing somebody else do the hoop, and then she even watched videos which showed the children hula hooping around. And then somewhere something went inside her mind. She even talked to a couple of people to understand how they did it, and then she did a lot of trial and error and repetition, and kept on doing it again and again and again until she had mastered that skill. So this is where I feel that this is something that comes through my observation, and um, this is something that I have come across, that these are the different ways in which a child learns. Now, when we go on to talking about various theories of various theories um, of learning, or various styles of learning. Now, long back, in fact, if some of you have seen the earlier thread where I put up the poster on learning styles, we had one of our members sharing that there is nothing called learning styles. And in fact, he put that comment at a time when I was reading a lot of criticism around learning styles. But before we get into that, we need to understand what are these learning styles and why is there so much criticism around it. And in today's session, I'm going to just give a bird's eye view to some of the learning styles that are there, and that have been recorded and written about. So somewhere in the 1992-93, there was this theory called WARC that came up around learning styles. styles. And this theory basically said that there are four different kinds of learners. There are visual learners who want to see things, who want to watch things happening. So this watching could be when someone is demonstrating an activity, or there is a video playing, or there's a presentation happening, or you're actually out in the open, in the garden, watching a butterfly, or whatever that you are interested in, or whatever is the goal for your learning. Then there are people who are auditory learners who want to listen to sounds, listen to what is being spoken, and listen to music. It could be rhythmic, it could be a monologue, it could be a dialogue, but these are people who learn through where their auditory sense is dominant or active. Then there are people who want to read and write and learn. Now, my oldest son thrives on reading and writing. In case there is any question that he has, he's curious and wants to know about something, he often goes to Google and reads articles around what is being said on that particular issue. Like for some last year he was completely into understanding epidemics and viruses thanks to our pandemic, and he used to read a lot around these topics, and that's how he made sense of things, and he needed to read more, and every reading brought in more questions, and he would read some more to find his answers for those questions. So that's how he was learning. His dominant rate at that for that particular topic was reading and writing. At the same time, my daughter was also, who's 6, was interested um, in understanding what epidemics and pandemics were about and what were viruses. However, she chose a different medium. She chose YouTube videos. She chose Dr. Binox to tell her more about this rather than reading. Okay, keeping her age in mind, she's just 6. She had not yet picked up reading, and definitely one wouldn't expect her to read too much. However, at that point of time, she was more of a visual learner. Then there are kinesthetic learners. What are kinesthetic learners? They are learners who want to make use of their motor skills. It could be fine motor or your other motor skills. It could be about walking, running, doing things, dancing. It talks about movement. Kinesthetic learners are those who need movement in their lives, and so they use a lot of. So even if it is doing an experiment, a kinesthetic learner would want to do it by themselves to make sense of it. Now, what I have observed among my children are a few important things which we need to note. One is every child may use a different uh, style for learning a different concept. This was what I found for my children. So, for certain things, they would want to read. For certain things, they would want to hear stories. For certain things, they would want to actually do things and see whether they work. So, for different concepts, they wanted to use different styles. The other thing that I observed was that with age, as they grew up, their focus on a particular style changed. So while my daughter is younger, she's more for visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning, whereas my older son is more about reading and writing, and is now able to make sense of abstract concepts. He doesn't constantly need to see or visualize them, or have somebody do an experiment for him, or he himself does those experiments. He can put those two and two things together in his mind to make sense of it. So that's the second learning that I had. The third learning that I had was it's these learning styles are not chock blocks. They're not like, okay, I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to remain a visual learner throughout my life. It is about children can acquire a different learning style as they grow, and this I have seen within myself too. Like right now I am doing a course on inquiry education, and that is very much reading writing heavy, whereas I am more of a auditory, visual and kinesthetic person. And there is an element of auditory in this because there are videos. However, uh, I struggle to maintain the to participate in discussions and to write down my views or to write down my questions and then read through other discussions. However, it's not that I'm not learning. I'm learning a new style along with learning a new content. And with every exercise that is being given to us, I know I am getting better and better at that particular learning style that has been used. So it's not that we cannot acquire different learning styles. I have realized that if I can acquire a new learning style, so can many other children. The other important thing that I have noticed and I have observed, especially since we started unschooling, is that these learning styles do not matter when there is an intrinsic motivation to learn something. So when I really want to learn something, I will use anything and everything that is there around me. Like, to give you an example, when my daughter was into learning, her whole interest was around learning about insects. She not only used visuals, she used auditory, she used to write too. She started writing, she was reading, she was running around insects and following them and watching them. And she had used multiple learning styles, and whatever came her way, she was just sticking to it. She just wanted it more and more and more and more, and that was how she was making sense of it. So there was a balance, there was everything. There were different learning styles at play when she was learning about insects. um, Now to move on to the next slide. And okay. Okay. Now, what I'm going to talk about here is a different learning theory, which I find very interesting to know. It's called the Cobb's learning theory, and it talks about both theory of how learning happens as well as certain learning styles that are dominant at each stage. And in fact, if you recall my first or the second session where I talked about constructivism and classical conditioning, and talked about the stages of learning, this is very similar to it. So, but I'm not going to talk much around the theory. I'm going to talk about it through my experience as a mother. So when my children were growing, okay, when my children were growing, what was important for them? The concrete experience. If you look at babies, what do? They want to taste everything. They want to touch, feel. They want their sense of touch, taste, hearing is a lot more, lot higher, and they want that concrete experience. Okay, and once they have that concrete experience, then they would diverge it, and they would get it was a continuous process, and they would associate it with other similar things. So, for example, when my daughter was small, she used to put everything in her mouth. So there were bowls, spoons, toys, plastic, anything and everything that she would see. Even the edges of my sofa, everything had to be tasted. She had to feel the concrete experience, and then what I could see and what I could observe was that these concrete experiences, she was making a lot of sense in her mind, and then she was associating them with other similar objects. And that is where, through your concrete eight experience, you diverge, you find the similarities and differences between various objects. You start from your taste, sense of taste and touch, you slowly move on to watching. And when you are watching, there is when you watch things around you, there is a reflective observation also happening. You are reflecting over what you observe. You're reflecting, you're thinking about it, you're looking at what you have learned in the past, what you have understood about these concepts from your past. You are associating them, assimilating them, thinking about them, and understanding more and more complex things. So your movement happens from concrete to the abstract. Yeah. And the concrete to the abstract thinking. So when you're thinking in an abstract way, there are so many abstract concepts. Like, say for example, in maths, you probably understand counting, which is a very concrete experience. You can even have concrete experiences with your addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You can actually do them in a concrete way. However, when you're taking them two steps ahead, and when you're doing algebra, which is quite abstract, it requires thinking, observation, reflection over your concrete experiences in order to make sense of them, in order to understand them. And and then, you start you start assimilating your thoughts and your or thinking together, and you understand various abstract concepts, and you actually see them happening. You can see, I think the best way to understand algebra, and people understand algebra completely when they start seeing algebra in the world around them. So now you're converging, and are you are into that active experimentation phase where you are actually seeing things happen. Okay, that could be in seeing things happen in your mind or through active experimentation. And then, as you go ahead in that particular concept, you also accommodate, and you feel, once again, your feelings and your doing is important, and you accommodate this learning with a lot of other learnings that you already have or you're going to learn. So this becomes an experience, and with a new experience and a new concept that you are learning, and you associate, accommodate, you assimilate, all these things happen. So, to give another example, water. Children see water every day while taking a bath, while they go to, while swimming, they drink water, they see water everywhere around them. Their initial experience is very concrete. And then when they observe other liquids, when they see other liquids, there is a lot of assimilation, conversion, and accommodation that happens, and where you're learning about one particular liquid that is a essential ingredient in your life, to other liquids that are not so much seen in your regular life, and you associate, and you form those similarities and the differences in your mind. There's a lot of thinking and a lot of processing that happens in your mind. Um, So that's about Cobb's theory, where he also says that, when you look at learning styles in this, there is one style where a person is more of a feelings person. Then there are people who are more of the thinking people. Then there are people who watch and learn, and there are people who learn through active doing. They need to do things to understand and make meaning of. So that's the Cobb's theory. And then, recently there has been another theory that has gained a lot of popularity. And this theory is Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. Now, here I want everybody to understand that what Howard Gardner is talking about is. Oops, sorry. What Howard Gardner is talking about is the ability to learn. So you have an intelligence to learn in a particular way. He's not talking about the style in which you learn. So he's not talking about how you learn. There have been many other learning styles developed on the basis of what Howard Gardner talks about in terms of whether you have this intelligence or not. But what he talks about is whether you have that particular intelligence to make sense of the world around you. So, what he has shared is initially he had only seven intelligences that he talked about, and then he had then I think a couple more were added. Now there are around nine of them. What he basically shared was, so far we were only looking at general intelligence, and which was probably a mark of whether you know something or you don't know, how fast you can grasp something or not. What Howard said was different people have different intelligences which help them learn. So, a spatial learner will probably um, will be using visualizing of the world in three dimensions or in two dimensions. He'll understand space and time much better. So those are spatial learners. Then a naturalist has an intelligence where he needs to live and in the nature and do things in the nature, and he very easily adjusts to learning with nature around him. A kinesthetic learner learns with coordinating your mind and your body. So that's bodily kinesthetic learner. A musical learner, a person with musical intelligence will learn and will pick up sounds, tones, rhythms much faster. A linguistic a person with linguistic intelligence will be very quick with words, will have the ability to find words to express what they mean. People who are intrapersonal will focus on understanding oneself, what they feel, what they get. So they're more internal. And interpersonal people with interpersonal intelligences, just as the word says, will learn more by being in the company of other people, and their ability to sense people's feelings, motives is much higher. And then there are logical mathematical intelligences, where ability to quantify things, proving them, all that comes easily. So they are the logical thinkers, or for them this intelligence is at a very dominant phase. Now, what Howard Gardner also says that all of us have these intelligences within ourselves. It's not that, if you're a naturalist learner, you're not going to have the mathematical learning ability, or if you are an intrapersonal learner, you're never going to have good interpersonal relationships, or if you are a linguistic, you will not be a spatial or a musical learner. He says that all these intelligences are part of us, and a combination of these play a role in the child's learning. So just imagine multiple combinations, millions of combinations are possible for a child to learn to learn anything. And all these intelligences are at play when they are learning a new concept or something. And, so further, this is around. So if you have a dominant kind type of an intelligence, it helps you know what kind of profession that you're going to be in. So this slide I put in just for fun, and also to bring it out to you all that the musical people with musical intelligence definitely have a very strong sense of logic as well as maths. So, and because everything in music is about patterns, it is about timing, it is about patterns, it is about the tone and all that, and which can be understood uh, mathematically. In fact, mathematical intelligence in a way exists in everything, because if you look at even flowers, you can notice the patterns and there are sequences. And if you notice nature, the way nature has been created also has a lot of maths in it. Your kinesthetic learning, dancers, athletes, surgeons, and everybody requires us an element of all these intelligences, even if one or two might be dominant in them. Now, when we look at Bernard's question, criticism, he came forth very clearly that there is no evidence around these proving that these learning styles work. And what I say is, it's true. It is difficult to find evidence. How are we going to observe millions of children? What tool can be used to observe and document data of millions of children? Because each child learns differently. Each child will have a combination of various styles that are into play. So I completely agree with what Bernard says. And when he says that, don't pay too much attention to what the styles are. Uh, I would say that be aware that there are different and ways in which a child learns. And however, don't insist that, oh, my child is a kinesthetic learner, so he's never going to learn through other ways. No, that's wrong. I think that's the wrong impression that is being given in the outside world. So, with that, I'm going to just share some of my thoughts that are there around around these learning styles. First and foremost, I felt that uh, yes, so there. I'm sorry, I got distracted by a comment that's come in. I'm going to show it. If the brain has plasticity, learning should also be similar. True, that's true. I haven't really got too much into plasticity learning, but I'm sure what you say makes sense. So, yeah, so the thoughts that I have, see, I'm a very simple person. I am not I've not delved too much into researching around how people learn. I heavily rely on my own experiences. So in a way, I'm an intrapersonal learner, and things have to make sense to me inside me before, or I can say that yes, this is it. And so this is something that I have thought about, and I am right now thinking about. One is most of these learning styles are have been are helpful to a teacher directed program, where a teacher is trying to teach a concept to a child. Okay, so the teacher already has a goal in mind, that the child, or an outcome in mind, that the child needs to learn this, and then the teacher observes and says that, okay, my this child likes to be on the move all the time, so I need to engage this child with doing something. Or this child loves to sing, so maybe I need to bring in music, some songs around that concept, for that child to learn. So when a program is completely teacher directed, knowing so when the teacher needs to bring in various ways of instruction, which would use spatial, intrapersonal, interpersonal, logical, visual, kinesthetic, all these different ways in their instruction. So I think it helps in a teacher directed program. Then, as I shared earlier, my through my personal experience, I feel children require a variety of stimuli to understand something things, and especially if they are self-directed learners, it doesn't matter whatever stimuli comes in their way, and helps them understand a particular concept, is welcome with self-directed learners. Then I've also, as I shared earlier, for different concepts, I have seen even myself or my children using different learning styles. Children are unique, so they are going to want to learn things differently, and monotony or using one single style bores them, makes them feel tired, lethargic, uninterested in what is happening around. Finally, I always ask myself, whose need is it? Whose need is it to learn a particular concept? Is it my need as a mom? Is it my need as a teacher or an adult in the life of the child? Or is it my child's need? Because if it is my child's need, then my child is going to use whatever comes across their way to learn that particular aspect. And if they don't understand it, they will go deeper and deeper into understanding that particular concept till they feel satisfied. Then the other question that comes to my mind is, evidence. Does evidence matter? Uh, when I look at these standardized ways of researching things, qualitative or quantitative research, I've seen they rely heavily on generalizing and drawing inferences, saying this is how things work. However, when I think about it, there are different ways in which things work. And a theory which comes in today might be countered by another theory tomorrow. So when we homeschoolers look at these theories, how important is it to look at evidence and say that we don't want our children to be in the be among the herd, right? We believe that they are not part of the herd, they are unique, they are different. So like, as I always say, if somebody tells me 85% of people believe that children are kinesthetic learners, then I look at them and say that, oh, so then maybe my children are part of the 15% and not the 85% who believe in that. So which is why I always question, how far do you rely on such evidences? And this comes across in many things, like watching screens. everywhere we are flooded with articles saying that watching screen, too much screen, is detrimental for a child. And then I look at my child and I see the amount of time they spend on their gadgets and the amount of learning that is happening on their gadgets. And then I say that maybe my children fall in the other part, which is they're not part of this herd. It doesn't affect them. And I give and stop thinking too much about it. So now, and then the last, as I shared earlier, what about the child's ability to learn a new way of learning? you know like I gave the example of me adjusting and learning a new style for my course in inquiry education. I feel that that's true for all children too. They do have the ability to learn a new way of learning. Uh, so we cannot question this ability. They might not want to at that particular time. For example, somebody might not want to learn about the stars and the moons through a song. They might want to learn about it by observing through a telescope. So that's fine. But it doesn't mean that they do not have the ability to do so. So it's just that, as Vaibhav put it in his comments, it is important to match what the child wants to learn, and how he wants to learn with how we facilitate the environment, with what we do about it, right? As parents, as homeschooling parents, we need to facilitate the environment to create those learning opportunities for our children. And if we and we cannot say that, oh no, no, you are musically inclined, so you have to learn about this concept by listening to songs. No, that's not how it works. The child might want to learn about a particular concept using a different style, or might want a different learning style to be brought into, so that he makes complete sense about something. So are we parents observant? Are we parents aware? And are we parents open enough to create a program which is accommodating and which accommodates all these aspects that are needed? So that was what I wanted to share. And lastly, I want to talk a little about self directed learners. As very often, very often, we wonder about what is self directed learning, especially when we live in a world where everything is teacher directed or adult directed or parent directed, where we believe that a doesn't child needs to be taught. We homeschoolers are now looking at a different way of learning, where we believe that a child can learn by themselves. They are naturally curious, they are naturally driven towards learning. And I've seen it happening at home. And let me be very honest, I have been a teacher driven person who slowly grew to become, to focus on self directed learning, and learning which is owned by the child, you know. So I have put up some links. I don't want to talk too much about it. Maybe in my next session I'll talk about self directed learning. But I've put a list of 4 videos which I do urge everybody to watch. I will also share this presentation so that you all get the links, or I'll share those links in the comment section. I urge all parents to uh, take a look at these videos with a very open mind, and reflect on what you see in the videos with your life currently. I'm not saying that every child has to be self directed in their learning. I'm not saying that every parent has to follow this approach. What I'm saying is that every parents need to be observant and see how their children are learning, and observe whether their child would require some elements of self-directedness as in their learning and living. So with this, I think I finish what I had to share today. If there are any questions, if anybody wants to share any experience of how their own children are learning, you all are most welcome. Do share it in the comments box. I can see that there are only two people watching my session live, but if at a later point, if you do watch this video, do share about share your experiences, your take or your perspective that is being shaped around learning styles. Okay, and with that, I'm going to say thank you so much, and I'll be looking through the comments section later. Thank you so much.